let me just let in a couple more people who just joined us. I know this experience is definitely not the same as watching a film collectively in a theater and discussing it in person, but we hope this NCMA Film Club can help fill the void until it is safe enough to have on-site film screenings again. Hoop Dreams is a very special film for me. It takes place in my hometown of Chicago, and I remember coming across it on my local PBS station when I was a teenager and being so engrossed by it. And it was one of the first films I had seen that showed the real Chicago, the not so glamorous and fun side of Chicago that was often depicted in movies like Ferris Bueller's Day Off and the Blues Brothers. It was this particular film that really showed me the power of documentary film to tell real stories and depict real people. I also selected the short film called Game, and I discovered Game through an online film festival called LunaFest, and it was just a short film that I felt was really powerful and had such a great message, and I just wanted to share it with more people. I'm so glad to be able to kick off this new virtual program with these two films, and I hope you all enjoyed watching them. Before I introduce our very special moderator today, I'd like to give an overview of our program and go over a few tips and guidelines to make our time together more enjoyable. We encourage you to use the speaker view as opposed to gallery view during the discussion, so this way you can see who's actively speaking. As you may have noticed when you joined, your microphones and video were muted by default. Please feel free to turn on your video, but we do ask you to keep your microphone muted at all times unless you're actively making a comment or asking a question. If you have a comment or question, you can let us know by using the raise the hand function on Zoom. Either physically raising your hand, I'll try to keep my eye on everybody, or you can also let us know in the chat. And then we can unmute you or let you know when you can unmute yourself so you can speak and participate. We just want to avoid people talking over each other. And to use the raise the hand, lower hand function, you can click on the participants icon at the bottom of your screen. And then when it comes up, there should be icons at the bottom, and there should be one that says raise hand. We also ask you that to make sure your Zoom screen name includes your first name and last initial, or last name if you want to put your full name. And you are welcome to participate as much or as little as you like. It's fine if you prefer to have your video and audio turned off throughout and choose to just use the chat function. We'll definitely try to keep an eye on the chat function as well, so we'll be able to communicate that to our speaker. Please be considerate of your fellow participants and let everyone have the space to share their voice. And finally, we want this to be a safe space for everyone to engage in dialogue. So we ask you to please be respectful of each other. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for our discussion tonight and fellow Chicagoan, Natalie Bullock Brown. And before you speak, Natalie, I just want to give another, read your bio again, just in case anybody didn't read it. Natalie Bullock Brown is a teaching assistant professor at North Carolina State University. She is the director producer of Bartman, Beyonce and Me, a documentary work in progress that explores the impact of beauty ideals on Black women and girls. And she's also a producer on the upcoming PBS documentary Hazing. She contributes to Back Channel, a monthly segment on WUNC's The State of Things, and was formerly an assistant professor of film and broadcast media at St. Augustine's University in Raleigh. She served as a co-host of Black Issues Forum, a public affairs program on UNC TV, and holds an MFA in film production from Howard University and a BA in English from Northwestern. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Maria. I'm really excited and honored to be the person getting to talk with everyone about this inaugural film, or this film in the inaugural film club event. I I saw Hoop Dreams when I think it first came out. As Maria shared, I went to Howard University, which is, who else went to Howard University that just got picked as VP? Who else went? Who else went? So Kamala Harris is a Howard University alumna, and I was there for grad school from 91 to 96. It took me 5 years to get my MFA in film production. And I originally went to film school wanting to be someone who went to Hollywood and wrote for, at the time, my favorite television show was the Bill Cosby exec produced A Different World. So I saw myself as going to Hollywood to write scripts and make movies. And then I was exposed to documentaries in one of my elective classes. And I forgot about Hollywood and decided that documentaries was what I wanted to do. And that has held true since then for almost that, actually next year it'll be 30 years. Yes, 30? Yes, 30 years. So anyway, Hoop Dreams came out a couple of years into my MFA program. And I was just blown away. As Maria said, you know, it was pretty amazing to see a film about Chicago that didn't depict Chicago and really just the affluent north side of Chicago. It was really interesting for me as you know, a native of the city and you know, someone familiar with the dynamics, the race dynamics in particular of the city, to see a film about young Black boys growing up and pursuing what, you know, if you're from Chicago, like the high schools produce some incredible basketball talent. So it was very interesting to see this film, know that it was on PBS, see what was possible with documentary film. And now almost 30 years later, watch it again. And, you know, I'm situated a little differently. I'm in the South now. I've finished my my film production degree. I've been working in documentary for a while. I've had a chance to observe some of the dynamics, and I teach Africana Studies and women's and gender studies at North Carolina State. So there's a way that what I teach informs how I look at Hoop Dreams today. So I'm gonna bring that to this conversation, but I really wanna know what you all thought about the film, what you think about it, what kinds of reactions did you have? And you can raise your hand, anyone who'd like to share.
Kevin Uy.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this was my first time seeing the film, and I thought it was an incredible film that really holds up extremely well. And I was reading a little bit more about it, and I think one of the things that it did that I think helps it hold up very well is that it's very, very lightly narrated, which I understand was kind of a new, not common among documentaries from before that period. So I wanted to know a little bit more, because I think that is one of the things that makes it hold up so well, but I'm curious about how it was perceived when it came out, given, I mean, if you think about like the views about race relations in the United States have changed immensely in the last 6 months, much less the last 26 years. And I'm just interested in like how it was perceived from that viewpoint in 1994.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm going to hold off on saying anything that I know about the perception and see what else other people have to say.
Cheryl Williams. You can go ahead and unmute yourself. Oh, Cheryl?
There you go. Still can't hear you.
Oh, no.
I'm not sure why. Cheryl, you wanna, oh, your computer mute might be on. You wanna put your reaction in the chat? Okay. And then we'll come back to you.
We also have KSJ.
Yeah, that's me. It's Kim. Sorry, I didn't get a chance to change
It's okay.
that. I found this documentary incredibly interesting. I just started watching a couple of the episodes of The Last Dance, the documentary about, Michael Jordan and the Bulls, and of course, Isaiah Thomas. And so I kept and also those were the years, I'm just old enough, that I was living in New York in those early 90s, and we used to go to all the Knicks, not all, we would go to some Knicks games at Madison Square Garden. So we were big Knicks fans. So of course we were very familiar with Michael. And so to see like this whole other influence through this documentary, and this documentary was just amazing, and how they follow these young men and in their lives. So I was kind of blown away by this documentary, but it's also been interesting watching it in tandem with The Last Dance, because they talk a lot about the influence of Michael Jordan, Isaiah Thomas on them, and their whole hoop dreams are because of these superstars. So just if that figures into your commentary.
No, that's awesome. Because I was thinking the same thing. There is a way that hoop dreams sort of sets you up. It's almost like the introduction to The Last Dance.
Yes.
If you don't know that history. So I can totally relate to that.
It's been fascinating.
It is.
Cheryl? Oh, can you, oh, she's still on.
No. Okay.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Cheryl. Does anybody else have any other? Lois? Lois, you can go ahead.
Hi.
Hello.
So I was utterly charmed by those two boys, Arthur and William. It was just an honor to spend time with them and to see them grow. I found it just remarkable that they had that kind of access through time to those families, and the families were very vulnerable in front of. You almost forgot there was a camera in the room. The intimacy was so raw. I thought we watched it over 2 nights because of the length of the movie. And when I went to bed after the first night, I thought this movie is going to totally break my heart. These boys are just going to, totally, lose all of their dreams. And to see Arthur mature and, and to see how William, he sort of pulled back from that I want to be a basketball star dream, basketball star, that just, and he, made a life for himself as well. I don't know, it was just a lovely movie, and I really am thankful that you all, made it, featured it, and that I got to watch it.
Thanks for that, Lois. JC? And Jim, we see you.
Hi. I thought it was really thought-provoking and a kind of film that you would keep thinking about over time. And I think as somebody doing a documentary, I just wonder how somebody knows when they start out with these two boys, or did they have more than two boys, but did they start out with these two? You know, you could spend all this time and maybe something happens and you know, whatever, a boy doesn't play anymore, you know, how insightful they were to pick these two and to be able to follow their lives. And I thought how difficult it would be to be honest, particularly when you're sitting there next to the coach that to me seemed like a bully, and not be able to, you know, because the camera's in your face, the coach is right there, how you could not get maybe angry and want to blurt something out, but they seem to hold their cool. And so I thought it's just a very thought-provoking film.
JC, let me ask you something real quick. Which coach were you talking about that seemed like a bully?
The coach at St. Joseph.
Pingator.
Yes,
Yeah.
I just thought, you know, his values were not the values that I would want in a coach or for my child or a parent, although I can see why it was an opportunity that they didn't want to pay us up, but still, it was kind of like a Bobby Knight of high school where, you know, your whole life had to be, your whole job, your whole life, forget your family, forget your values. It was a job, which again, William kind of figured out, and that made him not like basketball anymore.
An assessment. I just want to, I want to jump in real quick and address what, oh my goodness. I don't see, oh, Kevin asked, and what JC brought up in terms of how do you in a documentary, like decide who you're going to follow? Because you can make a decision to follow someone and it just not turn out, and then, you know, what does that leave you with? But Kevin, you asked about how Hoop Dreams might have been received in, I guess, 1994, because the narration is sparse and you're really just sitting there watching the story unfold. And I mean, while documentaries have been around for, wow, next year, I think, is the 100th anniversary of the first documentary, which was called Nanook of the North. So they've changed, of course, over time. But I would say, just from a student perspective, I was interested in documentaries, so I didn't think it was boring at all. But I have found that, you know, a lot of students are not interested in documentaries. That's changing because, again, the industry is changing so rapidly and it's becoming very commercial, and Netflix and Hulu and, you know, all of them have gotten into the mix. But I would say that, you know, it wasn't, I think older people were more fascinated with Hoop Dreams than young folk were. And I think that's because typically older people have a sensitivity to and like a patience with the pacing of a documentary. At least 26 years ago, that would have been the case. Now documentaries, I mean, Tiger King is a documentary series, right? But that is nothing like Hoop Dreams. So there's a way that documentaries have really evolved, and we could debate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, to be almost, you know, to really compete with scripted films, with scripted feature films, where you're not quite sure if a script was used to tell the story, because it's, you know, it moves, and the pace and the rhythm and the drama and everything going on rivals what you would expect from a feature film. JC, just to your question, usually filmmakers may, I think some documentary filmmakers might take offense to this, but the reality is you are trying to figure out who the characters, who your best characters are. So it's almost like throwing spaghetti at the wall to try and see what sticks, right? And from what I know about the production of Hoop Dreams, I do believe that there were more boys that the filmmakers were following initially. And it came down to William and Arthur because of their stories and what the filmmakers felt was compelling about their stories. And turned out that they were right, because it is fascinating to watch these young boys grow and become young men. But usually there are multiple characters that are being considered, and through pre-interviews, through time constraints, all kinds of things end up happening in the production process, and then certainly in the post-production and editing process, where sometimes you have to cut characters, not because they're not interesting, but because you don't have the time to include them. So I hope that helps a little bit.
So let's check on Cheryl. Cheryl?
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
All righty. I had a couple of thoughts on this from the time. It was interesting to me that how involved the family was with each of the boys' dreams. And that for Gates, while his coach wanted him to have basketball as his whole life, his family was definitely, no, that's just a part of your life. We have this unit, you have this baby, and you have to learn how to balance everything. I'm a product of a private school, so I have to be honest that when I first, in the beginning, when he went to St. Joseph and Arthur went to the public school, I had a little bias because I felt like, oh, well, the resources are going to be at the private school. Gates is going to have this support that maybe Arthur wouldn't have. And I didn't expect them both to reach, a portion of their dream. It ended up, they didn't go to the NBA, but they both were able to reach their dreams. And I think Arthur's family was open to the idea of, okay, well, we're not going to go through the private school 4-year college route, but we can still meet our goals by going through this junior college and doing it that way. So there was some flexibility and willingness to try a different way to reach the goal, which I think was a lesson. The other thing was that our life choices, each of these young men made life choices that I thought they were very lucky, because their choices that they made could have derailed their dream totally.
What kind of choice? Which choices are you referring to, Cheryl?
The choice, well, for Gates, the choice to start a family in high school. I mean, that wasn't really a choice, but, well, I mean, it was a choice. He was old enough, I feel like, that he and his girlfriend made that choice. And Arthur's choices was, just the estrangement with his family, with his father. And I think that his choice not to try and apply himself as well as he could at school. And I don't know if he was thinking, well, I'm going to be a basketball player, so I don't really have to, pay attention, do well in class. But both kids, I mean, really pulled from within to get whatever they needed to get to the next level. And I thought that was beautiful. That these kids from the inner city that, just looking at the face of it, on a racial basis, a lot of people probably would not think that they would be able to get as far as they did. And it was just a lot of it came down to their drive with the belief of their family also. And I like the way the family came together. So often in our culture, from 400 years ago, our families were pulled apart. And so that connectivity with family and that being together, sometimes that gets lost, especially in the media. I feel like the media likes to portray Black families as splintered. And in both these families, they were together and they definitely put their kids first. Even if the relationships with the parents weren't that great, the kids came first, and there was an opportunity for their kids to do well, and they went for it. One was a little bit more wealth, was better off economically than the other family, but even the poor family, the poorer family, Arthur's mother did what she could and went back to school and figured out a way for her to generate an income. And I know she was doing it for herself, but she was also doing it for her family, for them to be in a better place. And I think that builds confidence with kids. And when outside forces might be holding them back or putting them down, their family was there for them throughout the whole film. And I wonder if maybe that's what the filmmakers were thinking in terms of why they covered those kids. And I did go on YouTube and listen to the interview that they had as grown-ups. And they said that even though they didn't go to the NBA, the movie was pivotal for their life. It exposed them to so many different things and allowed them to just take off and find success in other areas. And to me, that's what education is about. And that's what, your confidence, when kids have confidence. So this path might not work, but if you're educated, you can, pivot like we're doing now, pivot to something else. And just both of these kids learned how to dig inside. They came up with their determination and were really able to attain their goals. And it turned out they had a great life. I mean, they're still being successful now, at least as of 2016 was the last time there was any information on them. So I thought it was good. And I like to make a plug for the game, the little short. I thought that was great. I did not figure out that kid was a girl until the locker room. Okay. And I was like, oh, this was great. And so that just brings us to 2020, how when in terms of gender, it's like, okay, well, she was better than all the boys. Why can't she play on the boys team?
Thank you, Cheryl. You I'm gonna have to pull you into my classroom when I teach a film class, because you just did the analysis for us. Thank you very much for your comment.
Natalie, we have two other people.
Yep.
Jim Smith, you had your hand raised, and Ethan as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is Jim Smith. I really enjoyed both of the films. The Hoop Dreams was a window into a world that I have so little experience with, and I just found it so moving. A lot of things have already been said, but about the families and they're just doing it for the kids and really being there to support them. I thought that was that, and I got really choked up when the dad was getting hooked on crack, and it was like, oh my God, this is going south. And then he gets straightened out and comes back to the family. And, even though it was rocky, that was a beautiful thing. In terms of game, I wouldn't, and I didn't go back to, I didn't even think about this until just now, but I'm assuming that was not a documentary, but okay, yeah. But I agree with Cheryl. It was I didn't have it figured out until the locker room scene either, and I thought it was so cool that the coach said, "All right, go for it, go all the way." So I'm really glad that I saw both movies, and thanks for doing them.
Thanks for that, Jim.
And Ethan?
Hi. I first saw Hoop Dreams, I thought the editing was my favorite part of it. It was absolutely inspiring because there must have been hours and hours of footage that they had to cut for that movie. And they only swindled down to 3 hours. I think that's amazing. And the filming was 4 years, but the movie in general took 8 years to make. It was an 8-year production. And the editing also makes the film not feel like a documentary, in my opinion. I think it feels like, if you take out the narration, it feels like a movie, a drama. Mm-hmm. And there's this one, my favorite part of the movie is this transition cut when the St. Joseph team gets on the bus and they're all sitting there, they're all quiet, and they're all in their pristine sweat jackets. And then it cuts to the Marshall bus and they have different shirts on. They can't afford sweat jackets. And they're cards in the back of the bus. They do compare and contrast story inside on the represent misery like one story instead of two separate stories.
Ethan, we had a hard time, or at least I did, understanding the last thing you said because the connection was kind of wonky. Can you repeat the last comment you made?
What was the last thing you heard? Sorry.
I couldn't even tell you, darling, because it all got kind of, it got kind of, I'm trying to see.
I think.
The last thing I heard you say was that there was, that the film, the editing was so good, it didn't even feel like a documentary. It felt like it was a drama. Yeah.
And the way that the editing makes the two stories, compare and contrast the two stories, like on the bus when the St. Joseph team gets on and they're in pristine sweat jackets and it's all paid for, and it transitions to the Marshall bus and it's rowdy and people are playing cards in the back and there's no sweat jackets. It's just really cool how they compare and contrast the two different storylines.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I wanted to, okay. Wendy, I see your hand.
So I have, well, first of all, I watched it around the same time you did, but clearly I'm not a film student. I am a lover of sports. And I think, putting it into current day context, I don't think the story would be very different. I think you might be able to go to different parts of the country and tell the story, but the story still is the story. I wonder, after watching the game, if there may come a point in time where the story is girls' ability to compete for the spaces on teams with boys. I know that will look very different, but if a girl has the skill set, I wonder if there will come a point in time where we'll see that. But I guess my question for you as a person who does documentary film work, how do you think the story might have been told different through the eyes of an African American? Do you think it looks different, sounds different, feels different? How do you think the story is told differently if it's about kids from the South, the rural South, as opposed to the city?
I appreciate the questions. You're actually providing the segue into what I was going to sort of frame our conversation around. So thank you for that. But I see one more hand, Harold Cudler, before we move on.
Yeah, although I'm fascinated now by the question that there's too. Yeah, I saw, a tension in Hoop Dreams between, especially now, watching this film now, the tension between the exploitation of these two kids by everybody, especially personified by the coach at St. Joseph's, but really everybody, and even their parents, this is our way out, and everybody's so much depending on this, the way that Williams' brother is vicariously, succeeding in life when he's sinking so fast, and that in itself is so tragic. I understand that he later died, but prematurely. But there's that on the one hand, and on the other hand, there really is this courageous story of Arthur getting on that bus, 3-hour round trip, walking in the snow, to this school and putting up with, all the strangeness. And the truth is, yeah, this really is a way out, but it's also a bright, shiny object that's being used to make use of these kids and their talents. And, that last scene with William and the coach at St. Joseph's, so don't be a stranger, which basically means, we're done with you. And so that tension really, I think, in many ways drives this film and creates, it makes you want to stay with it for 3 hours and then go look it up on YouTube. And after it's over, well, what happens next? It's not a satisfying feeling, though. And I'll just say one more thing, that I didn't see this movie when it came out. I knew when it came out. I expected a good time, great movie about basketball, and isn't this going to be fun? And it wasn't that at all. And although it did have its fun and exciting moments, it wasn't that at all. So I'm really surprised by this film and really how intense it was.
I appreciate your comments, Harold. And there are a couple of things that you said that I want to address. But Wendy is indicating to me in the chat that she has one more thing she wants to say. Go ahead.
So a couple of things. I've heard people talk about Coach Pingatory from being an athlete, from growing up with folks who made it and didn't make it. Coach P really wasn't different from most of the coaches that were coaching most of us back then. And maybe the only difference now is the political correctness that coaches have to act with because of parents and how they engage. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there was a lot of the exploitation exists because of how we resource schools. And so when you look at the private school, especially in cities, but not just the cities, but when you look at the backdrop of there being a private school and a public school, why don't the kids who go to public school, since we all pay taxes, why don't they have access to resources? Now, I'm being facetious on a certain level, but the reality is when we start talking about equity and the things that we're seeing and talking about now, since this is a time where we're talking about Black Lives Matter, the reality is resources are a big part of why kids go to those private schools. They would stay in their communities if their schools were resourced adequately.
Great points. Did you put your hand down? Is it Vaishali?
Yeah, it's Vishali. I actually was really curious to hear your answer to Wendy's question before we were going to move on, just like how different it would have been. But I put my hand down because Wendy just said the equity piece. Thinking of.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so a couple of things that I want to say I appreciate what Wendy said because it kind of adds to what I was thinking about as I was listening to Harold. And that is like Cheryl, I'm a product of a private school too. And there is a certain, certainly there are resources, there are all kinds of things that you get when you go to a private school that you might not be able to get at a public school. But there's, when you're a Black student, especially in Chicago, you are leaving your community to go an hour, in Arthur's case, 3 hours round trip to a school where you don't know anyone, where you don't have the same level of support that you have in your community. And there is a cost ultimately to that type of engagement, especially without the support. And that's one of the things that struck me. And I guess probably it strikes me now, and it probably struck me when I first saw the film about Arthur's story, is that he's kind of chewed up and spit out by St. Joe's. Because he doesn't perform in the way that, they expect him to, but it does not seem that, what needs to be taken into consideration to help him succeed all around is thought about. And so that's part of, I guess that would be my critique of the film. And I'm gonna flesh that out a little bit, and then I'd love to hear what you think. But my overall critique of the film in today, in 2020, is that there is no critique. There is no analysis. There's no context that's given for why, why are there neighborhoods like the Cabrini Green housing projects, which thank God don't exist anymore in Chicago? But why do they exist in the first place? Why are Black families having to live under those conditions? Why is Arthur's family struggling so much? Is it just what happens to Black folks? Or is there a reason that this type of drama and struggle is occurring? And I would submit to you that a part of the drama and perhaps why the filmmakers decided to pick these young men is because of all of these different tensions and conflicts that they're dealing with, which in my humble opinion, but definitely informed by history, is based on stereotypes about Black people. And so to me, there's a way that Hoop Dreams, unfortunately, in spite of how well the story is told, in spite of the editing, in spite of the fact that these young men do show us something about the resilience and the courage of the human spirit and will, at the same time, they are held up as pretty much like examples of what it means to be Black and male at that particular time. And it also reinforces this idea of, I can't remember who said it, but of trying to get out. We're always trying to get out of our communities. We're always trying to get out of the hood through basketball, through entertainment, through this, through that. And that is very misleading when you think about the representation of Black people. And so thinking about Hoop Dreams that way, it is a classic. I mean, I can't debate that. We cannot dispute that. It's stood the test of time for almost 30 years. And the fact that you all watched it, some of you for the first time in the past week, and were moved and, influenced by it and impacted by it, thank you, says something about the endurance of the film. But there is a way that we have to think about a film like Hoop Dreams and not let it off the hook for not doing work that is absolutely essential, especially in a moment, as Wendy said, when we are, many of us at least, are saying Black Lives Matter and people are protesting for racial equity. So given that, what do you all think about that? And I'm already with receipts. I got scenes that I can show you that I'd love to talk about and see what you think about representation. But what do you think about what I just said? And Vashali, I'll start with you. Oh, no, Kevin, I'm sorry. His hand was up first.
Yeah, thank you. So this was actually kind of what I was trying to get at with my question originally. So when I was talking about the light narration and how it was perceived in the 90s, I think about I watch it now and it's gut punch after gut punch of examples of systemic racism, from housing to education to drugs to crime to everything, right? And this this film really displays a lot of that. But in 1994, the language of systemic racism isn't part of the common lexicon. So I struggle to imagine what a narrated version of Hoop Dreams sounds like from the perspective of people talking about race and racism in 1994. And that's why I was kind of curious, I think we can watch this film today and get so much out of it. And I'm curious, like, if it was narrated, if they did that work, like maybe it like never becomes a hit film. Maybe it never wins Sundance, right? Because like a 2020 language perspective on what's going on there isn't acceptable in 1994. Does that make sense?
It totally does. I think that's a great point. Yeah, there's definitely a way that Hoop Dreams would not be, if it was made today, I think we would have more of an issue with it. It would not be the classic that it is, right? But you're right. In 1994, there was not this cultural, at least, and certainly in many ways, a lot of folk did not have the historical context to contend with what we're looking at. I mean, Black or white, or other people of color. Like, no one had that necessarily, unless they were studying it, intentionally. So I agree with you. Yeah, I think that's a really astute comment. Thank you for that. Ashley,
yeah.
What were you going to say?
I really liked your point. I think that I wonder what it looks like. This is my first time watching it, and I think for me it was really difficult to see it without that narration, because I worried that so many people would watch it and just take away the stereotypes. And certainly, like, there are all these like equity issues that feed into some of the challenges. There are policy issues that Chicago Public Schools itself and Chicago City makes that actually
absolutely
contribute to a lot of what you saw in the film, and they never talk about that. And it's an interesting city to choose, because that city itself has had so many issues in with that. So I agree with you that without narration, you're just kind of leaving it in a vacuum, and sort of a dangerous vacuum.
Let me just make sure thank you so much for that. And let me make sure that I understand what both you and Kevin mean by narration. Are you talking about the literal voiceover, like the voice of God that we hear throughout the film, every once in a while, that kind of tells us a little bit about what's happening in the moment in that particular scene? Is that you?
I don't know if it's that. To me, it's just even maybe something at the beginning that says, like, here's something about this community, or like, here's some context setting for you of this film, versus like explaining what you're about to see. And I was trying to think, there was a film a while back that was made about the charter school system and talking about educational inequity, but they did a good job of saying, like, here's what charters try to do and here's what they are. But this movie just doesn't offer you any context.
Yeah, same from my perspective. Like that contextual piece. Like I think that's why, like, I can view it now and be really impressed by, and because I understand what's behind it. But if you're watching it acontextually, then even now, right? I think there are people who are watching who don't necessarily understand the systemic problems that have led to, like, why these boys' lives are so hard. And even in, right, like, as I think about our discussion tonight, right, like, there's a lot of talk about basketball, and to me, that's like, isn't a film about basketball at all, right? Like, basketball is the muse, right? But it's just, that's, we could talk this whole session about and not mention the basketball parts at all, and I think that would, right, like, that would be what I would want to hear.
Absolutely. I mean, in many ways, this is a film about basketball, and in many ways, it's not a film about basketball. It's a great point.
I wanted to say that, you know, just because this was done back, what, 30 years ago, the film was done.
Almost.
Don't think it's not the same today.
Absolutely.
I'm not talking about the stereotypical things that were in the movie, but the lifestyle, the differences in the educations, the opportunity, I guess it's the opportunity that is not the same for these kids, for kids of color, for poor kids. And it's not just Black kids. I think it's poor. In America, it's poor kids. Mm-hmm. It could be basketball, it could be film students, it could be drama students, it could be, you know, students that want to be mathematicians or whatever it is, depending on where you fall in our strata in America. Some people are going to have a different level of privilege than others. And then there's always going to be those kids who are just wanting their dreams so much, or have the support from their parents or from the church, or a benefactor who sees something. Like you look at the ballerina, Copeland. I mean, somebody saw her talent and became her benefactor and allowed her to kind of be plucked up out of the circumstances of her life. And then she was prepared, and she had her drive and her dream, and she was just able to take it to a whole nother level. So I think when we talk about the racism part, or the inequities or the privilege, or when we get onto that realm, that's where the work needs to be done, I think. And movies like this show you where, okay, so, you know, make the policies more case by case. I mean, yeah, you got to have policies, you got to have rules. But if somebody is struggling and somebody is, at least in the transition until we get to the ideal, we've got to be willing to overlook where somebody lives, the fact that they live in Chicago versus, you know, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and make adjustments for that. And not have it on the students so much, but that the adults in the room take some of that heat, I guess.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you saying that, Cheryl, because I want to be clear that I do think that the film points out different things that need work, right? I think that the film shows clearly, like and all of you made comments to one degree or another about what you saw that, you know, that sort of pointed to, for instance, you know, the fact that I think it was JC that was talking about Coach Pingator. You know, he clearly is, you know, sort of preys on students. The coach at Marshall talks about how I can't do it. Like I can't go out and recruit students to the degree that, you know, they don't have anything left when they've given everything to Marshall. Like I can't just think about them in terms of how much money they can make the school, right? So there's a bit of a critique that comes about, you know, the capitalistic nature of basketball recruitment, the fact that the kids are pursued so young, you know, 11, 12 years old. So there is a way that the film points out certain things, and it's absolutely by design, because, you know, the editor, with the direction of the directors, is making decisions about what different people are going to say and when they're going to say it, and whether or not it will be included, because they're trying to tell a certain story, right? So that is like absolutely true. My issue issue is context, is more explanation, or explanation that doesn't just come from, you know, a comment, you know, a soundbite from a character in the film, but somebody, I would have loved to have seen, or it be indicated maybe by the questions that were asked of the characters. What do you think about this? So that we could get some sort of information that speaks to why structural inequity is in place, or bring in scholars to address it. That would have changed definitely the nature of the film. But the point is, in order for people to not see a lot of what on the surface looks like stereotypes, is stereotypical representation of Black people, you have to have a way for people to understand, okay, what's underneath these inequities, these discrepancies, these challenges that these two young men are facing and their families day in, day out. Why does that happen? And you don't want to leave your viewers thinking that, well, it's just them, or it's just their families, or it's because their dad left, or because they had a baby, or because, you know, this is just what happens with Black people. And that is what ends up happening, unfortunately, not with all viewers, but with a lot of viewers, if there is no critique that helps guide you through how you should think about these issues. I wanted to say, to read to you, maybe everyone saw it, and then I'm gonna get to Lois and Harold. Something that, is it Kim, KSJ? It's Kim, put in the chat, which is a question. So is the film trying to say it is the fault of the boys that they didn't make it, or trying to make them heroes because they somehow survived the system? I mean, I would love to hear, Lois and Harold, in addition to what you were gonna say, do you wanna address that? You wanna say something to that effect? Because I think it's a great question.
This is John. I'm Lois's husband, so we didn't.
Hey, John.
Yeah, there was something that I wanted to say. Yes, I don't know. I took the two young men. I thought they had a lot of strength, and I'm getting feedback, but you know, they both, in their own way, succeeded. I know Lois was saying at the beginning she thought for sure that William was going to do well, and Arthur early on looked like he was going to falter, you know, but he had a great smile, and he kept at it, and you know, they both matured and did pretty well. And so I don't see them as heroes or just surviving the system. The other thing I wanted to say about context was, you know, maybe it's because I'm 66 and lived a long time, and maybe I'm a little more aware now, but I thought the movie was pitch perfect in making you wonder what the context is for this, you know. So if they narrated it as a social dialogue about why the families are in this position, it's a different movie to me. This is, you know, you hardly even feel interviews or anything like that. You're just watching them and you're seeing the struggles, and you wonder why, you know, why is this happening? These people are having their lights turned off, and this mother who's got so much strength and, you know, graduates from the nursing program. And so I kind of thought it was great. And like somebody said before, you get done with the movie, you want to get online and find out what happened to these people. The characters were so compelling, and none of them are actors. They're real people. And, you know, like Arthur's father was a charming man, and he, you know, he just couldn't stay out of trouble. He loved his family, but he, you know, and it's, you know, what's the environment that makes it so hard to keep your family unit together? And you could go into that as another thing, but I think that it just leaves you with that question of, you know, how is this happening? And, you know, I think that's pretty powerful in itself, even though they don't give you the answer, maybe, you know. It makes you want to find the answer. So.
You all couldn't hear me, could you? Thank you, John, for that.
Yeah,
Appreciate that comment.
Yeah.
Thank you. Harold, do you want to say something else?
Well, yeah, you know, you're bringing to mind, years ago at a professional conference, we have these media sessions, and I got to host Gordon Quinn presenting a different documentary called The Interrupters, because we were in Philadelphia. I'm pretty sure it was Philadelphia. And, you know, The Interrupters is about people in this really really difficult inner city community who don't really trust the police, but try to keep peace in their own neighborhood by literally interrupting violence when they see it kind of gelling. When there's conflict on the street, everybody on the street knows it. And these are just normal people. In fact, one of them, the featured character, was the daughter of a gangster in the community who knows everybody and is respected because her dad is such a tough guy and I think feared. And she goes up there and she gets in people's face and say, if you keep doing what you're doing, people are going to get killed. Is that what you want? And he brought her and some of the other people to the meeting. I don't remember that much of what Gordon Quinn said, but reflecting on this conversation and thinking about the movie and thinking about that evening and the interrupters, I don't think he'd want to use narration. I think, in fact, he got away from it further because I think what he's really interested in is showing how human beings transcend incredibly tough odds and tough neighborhoods, and how the human spirit is kind of comes forward in times of stress. And I think if he had that eye of God thing, if you had more of Spike Lee, I think he had just the right dose of Spike Lee explaining. I think Spike Lee got to be the eye of God, saying, "Hey, listen, kids, don't you realize what net you're in right now here at this fancy camp? That you're just fishing a net, and they're going to throw you back if they don't like you." But I think Quinn is more interested, even though he's using the inner city as the backdrop. I think he's interested in how human beings transcend or almost transcend or struggle to transcend almost impossible odds. And so he wants you to see and feel that. He doesn't want to tell you about it.
Appreciate that, Harold. Thank you for that. All right, so we are going to go to 8:30 if that's cool with you all. And I want to ask you a question. Who do you think the audience was or is for Hoop Dreams? Who do you think Steve James and his co-directors made the film for?
At least one audience is young athletes with the desire to try to make it.
Okay. Anybody else?
Dean says PBS.
Okay. Right. But well, who's the audience? Who are the directors envisioning are going to sit down and watch this? So when they are telling the story, who are they crafting the story for? What kind of people do you think?
Yeah, I think it's for, just families, a general audience of either families of kids who want to go this route. Because even today, somebody was saying in the chat that, they start so young with prepping these kids and putting that pressure on these kids. And even though these are Black kids, I would have to imagine that any kid that's got this dream, I want to be an NBA player, and their family gets behind them, that they're going to go through similar pressures, similar obstacles, if they get hurt, if they have personal issues, if they have mental health issues. So I think that the audience, besides the athletes, just anybody that was connected to or has an interest in the inside or the behind the scenes of athletic accomplishment, say it that way.
Gotcha.
Athletic
Okay.
accomplishment.
Okay, Cheryl. Okay, Kevin, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm going to be the cynic here. So I wonder if, because I know I read originally that they meant to make a half-hour documentary, and when they they got more and more content, and I'm curious if maybe when they understood the kind of story they had, that part of their main audience was critics. It was like very critically acclaimed. It won at Sundance. It won the Academy Award for Best Editing. So I wonder if that was also in their minds about like, hey, let's make a real like award winner here.
Mm-hmm.
Darling of the crowd.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Jean on her iPad said, liberal college educated Democrats who are curious about Black sports stars and open to integration.
I think
Go
I'm
ahead,
on.
Jean. Yeah, we
hear
can
me?
hear you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so just who it was made for. I was really struck right at the outset, to hear a white narrator.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was like, oh, this is quaint, And when I looked at the credits, I'm like, are there any Blacks in the credits?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but I think it's vastly by and large, it was a movie made by white people.
Mm-hmm.
Am I wrong?
Yes. Oh, no. You're absolutely right.
1994 has been a long time ago.
It was made by white people for white people.
And yet it's wonderful universality. Like I was writing about Michael Jordan, and you're right, it was Wilmington. But he says in the Last Dance, he says, I just wanted to get out of Wilmington my whole life,
Mm-hmm.
And my brother, who's even older than I am, he was so excited. He said, I want to write Michael Jordan and say, I always felt that same way too. I wanted to get out of the town where we grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
That's a universal aspect of this. I mean, it overlooks, the horrors of growing up in the living situations that they did in Chicago. But yeah, I think that's who was watching it.
Mm-hmm.
That's who it was made. It was shown on PBS, right?
It was, yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
financed by them and all.
Yeah.
And so they were the liberal, I mean, they could do no wrong from the white side back in the day.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Jean. It's really, I appreciate your forthrightness, because PBS even to this day, although it is
very privileged
and it's accessible to everyone, the people who tend to watch and support with their dollars public television, it's not by and large white folks, but the percentages are higher in terms of white support than the rest of us. So there is a way that, the film is designed to reveal certain things about these young men, their families, and what they go through. But it's through the lens of white directors who are thinking about a white audience. And it takes me back to the question that I think Wendy brought up towards the beginning of our conversation, which is how would the film be different if I had made it, or someone else that is African-American had made it? What would be included and what would not? And I know Harold and I think JC had their hands up, but if you would bear with me for one moment, I want to share a couple of scenes with you and just see what you think. All right. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. And I'm going to take all of us off so that we can see it. All right. Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Hold on a sec, sorry. It may be, you know what, Maria? I'm not sure that Criterion is gonna let me share. But we'll try it one more time and see if it works.
For whatever reason, are not going to be very successful as far as here.
You can't see anything, can you?
The civil rights movement started off in the
Yep.
50s.
We can hear it though.
I don't think it's gonna allow me
Yeah,
to.
that's strange. Yeah, it
It
might be
is
like a
strange.
copyright or.
Some platforms don't allow you. I ran into this when the other day when I tried to show a film in class. I think it was HBO Max. It would not allow me to share it. Okay, so I'm gonna have to set the scene for you. One scene that, there were quite a few scenes that you know, I took note of. But one is, if you remember, this is fairly early on. William, we hear William talking about, well, first of all, we hear that William, when he first arrives at St. Joe's, that tests revealed that he was operating at a 4th or 5th grade level, right? I can't tell you how I would do that differently, but again, context. I think I would definitely want to explain why is that? Why? Because it's not that William just, you know, he's just not smart. He doesn't have the ability. But there is something about the education that he had leading up to him going to St. Joe's. Now he's a freshman and he's operating on a 4th or 5th grade level. Why was that allowed? How did he even get to that point? Why was there no intervention, right? So that's number one, because again, context really matters. Representation matters. The way that we reinforce, either reinforced or we counter negative narratives that, whether we realize it or not, we're fed every single day and conditioned to believe. If we don't have something that challenges those ideas, we're going to continue to believe them. And, you know, to be completely frank, because we live in a white supremacist society, everything is framed from this idea that whiteness is the standard, it is the default. And so if you talk about young Black people and you put them in the backdrop of they're, you know, not smart, there's a gap in their education, they live in the projects, they don't have money, the lights are off, like, can you see how that just reinforces what we see in the news every night, what we see in a lot of movies? There's a way that without us, if we are not interrogating these images and the messaging that's coming at us as a result of those images, then we're gonna believe it. It just keeps, it promotes the same ideas over and over again. Another thing that I wanted to say, and especially in terms of the white supremacist framing that I think is used without it necessarily being a conscious thing, is William's eventual achievement at St. Joe's. He says, I just knew everyone there was smarter than me. He's talking about when he first got there. He was intimidated, he was really shy, he felt that everybody was smarter than him. But as time went along, this is what he says, I saw I was as good as them. But the problem, again, is that he's comparing himself to a standard, right? He's not thinking about, he's not even thinking about the context of his own life, right? We don't get to hear that, not really. Although he is very thoughtful. You know, both of them are very thoughtful, very wise young men. But we don't really get to understand even how William got to the point where he thought that all these kids at St. Joe's were smarter than him, right? Why? What a horrible thing to show up at a school and think you are the dumb one and you're only there for basketball. What kind of racist tropes does that reinforce, right? Black folks are just good at basketball, but they can't excel at academics, right? So this is part of, you know, I get that I teach this, but this is also media literacy. It's just being able, and I think all of you again, made such insightful comments that speak to a lot of these themes and some of the problems with the way that the young men are depicted, even though the film does also show us the problems that need to be fixed, but without a critique of these systems, like a one that really helps us to understand how they get caught up in these systems and how their parents are caught up in them. And, you know, all the ways that these forces really kind of conspire together to, you know, by the time the film is over, Arthur's mom doesn't even have any teeth. Like, what does that say, right? I mean, these are things that are very subtle, but I think if I were the filmmaker, I would have been like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna get you some teeth. I'm going to take you to the dentist. I'm gonna pay for that because I'm not gonna have you on here without teeth, because that is also a way of negatively representing this woman who, what many of you said, was very strong. Clearly she's resilient, clearly she's strong, but she deserves to be represented in the best light possible. All the rest of it is going to, you know, kind of come out in the wash. But that is a choice to show that she doesn't have any teeth by the end of the film. And we have to think about, well, why is that? Why was that decision made? Why wasn't something else thought about? Why is that not okay?
It's
okay,
a documentary.
Go ahead, Jane.
It's a documentary.
True. It's true, but again, do we get any explanation of what's happening to Mrs. Agee's teeth along the way?
I missed that. I watched it in pieces and I didn't.
You didn't see that. Mm-hmm. Sherry, go ahead.
It makes me think a little bit about how, you know, the boys were exploited by the schools, and you could say a similar thing about the families by the producers of the film.
And you know what, to their credit, I want you to know that I understand that there were times when the producers knew, you know, that someone's lights were going to be cut off, someone's water was going to be cut off, and they paid. You know, they paid for that to be fixed. And, you know, there's something in documentary filmmaking, that's being talked about a lot right now, especially in this moment of racial reckoning, which is extractive filmmaking, where filmmakers, typically white male filmmakers, go into communities that are not their own to tell these stories. They, you know, they do these interviews, they interrupt people's lives, you know, with consent for the most part, and then they leave. And the films go on to win awards and they get all kinds of accolades, and the characters are left to their lives. And in some ways, sometimes characters really benefit. But one of the things that is increasingly being talked about is not only should these stories be told by, should a story be told by a filmmaker that is not from the community, but if it's going to be told, can we get some people on the crew in decision-making positions who will help them to navigate the issues that come up that they may not be aware of, and not out of any malice, right? It may not be a malicious situation where, you know, filmmakers are just like, I just want to tell this story, I don't care who I have to hurt. You know, I'm not saying that, but it's necessary to have perspective. And there's a way that in many instances, filmmakers go into communities that they don't know anything about, and they don't have anybody to pull their coat about how they're representing a certain character, or what's going to happen to this character. This character is struggling, but we got to keep the camera rolling, right? These are some ethical issues that come up in storytelling.
I think to me, that's just part of a much bigger narrative in terms of interpretation. It makes me think of, there was this TV show, you may have seen it, it was Matt Damon, and they had this film contest, and they were evaluating the films.
Greenlight Project.
All, you know, white men, and the Black woman spoke up and talked about how the African Americans were being represented, and the Matt Damon turned into a monster. I always had liked him up until then, but he was so mad at her. And I will say, having had that experience, watched that, I had that happen to me in a conversation where, white male and having conversations, and then when the subject of racism came out, and it was back in the similar thing when you talk about interpretation. It was that person's ability to say, I can interpret if that would be offensive to somebody African American, because I am African American. And that difference brought an anger. Mm-hmm. And so I think if you're that separate and that apart, then you're not going to have that sensitivity to say, I need to bring somebody in who doesn't look like me, and even to listen to them when you do bring them in.
Yeah, exactly. I appreciate that. It's just necessary. I mean, I think that if I were to tell the story of, if I were going to do a documentary on Harold, I'm going to pick on you, on Harold Cudler, right? And I don't know anything about Harold's family. I don't know anything about Harold. I stalk him because I'm like, I'm going to tell Harold's story. And then I don't ask Harold anything about his perspective. And I'm not saying that the filmmakers did this, but the point is, filmmaking is supposed to be collaborative. In its best form, that's what happens behind the scenes. Filmmakers collaborate with the characters in their films and assume and allow them to be experts in their own experience, right? In their own lives. And that just doesn't always happen. Now, just to be completely fair and give Steve James, the main director of the film, credit, I don't think that he was trying to be extractive. I'm looking in the chat, and I think Gladys shared that each of the families were paid $200,000 each to participate. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, that's what I'm talking about, because the film has made much more than that, right, for the director. So being thoughtful, but that doesn't happen. I mean, a lot of times that type of sharing and collaborating does not happen. So I applaud Steve James for that. That's an amazing thing. But there is still a need for critique, and that's the main point.
And I will say, I don't know enough about him to say if that happened or if that happened in the film. That to me was just more of a big picture conversation in terms of how people are presented and who's coming to tell their story. But I do think it is important that that story was told, and it was beneficial that whatever their background was, that they chose to come and tell the story, even though they did have some elements of it where it was, as you said, maybe not the way you would have presented it if you had a different sensitivity.
Thank you, Sherry. P. Hoffman at twr.org. Who's that? Well, in the chat, they asked, can you share what you think was, Paul Hoffman. Thank you, Paul. Paul asked, can you share what you think was false in the representations in the film? When I say that the representations are problematic, even though it's true that Arthur's father left, even though it's true that he, got hooked on drugs, even though it's true that William had a child out of wedlock his sophomore year, I think it was, even though all these things are true, what I'm talking about is how they're represented, how they're shown on screen. What are we shown? And then what are we told about that? If anything, that helps us to understand something more than Mr. Agee is on drugs. right? There's a way, I wish I could show you the scene because it's probably the scene that I have the biggest problem with, because it's what's not said that is unfortunate to me. If you remember, there's again, early on in the scene, after Arthur's father has left, which I question even why that was necessary to know or make a big deal of it, because we see this sequence of images, of photos, almost like it's a photo album. And in the course of that, of cutting from one photo to another of Arthur's father with the kids and everything, then we find out through narration that after 20 years of marriage, he left the family.
Natalie, let me guess which scene you're talking about. When he comes to the basketball court.
Yes.
And he's him and Man are dunking, and then he just randomly goes over to the corner to buy drugs in the middle of this.
Yes, and the camera sort of follows, watches him. The camera is sort of, it's as if the camera is playing basketball with Arthur, because it's still on the basketball court, but it turns its attention to Mr. Agee in the corner and sort of watches what he's doing over there. And I guess the point is that if I were doing the film, it's not so much that I might not have included that, but I think I would have shot it a different way, not as a voyeur, like kind of observing from afar, but I probably would have maybe asked, maybe done an interview, in my interview questions, maybe asked Mr. Agee, what's going on? How are you feeling? What's happening? Tell me about the drug use. Let's talk about that. He does talk about how he got laid off from one job after another, but we're kind of left to assume that because he got laid off, like we don't know why, what's the context of that? We could find that during that time, there were jobs closing, there were factories closing. Like, I'm not sure, but I know that there's a reason why he was being laid off. There's context for that. And there's context for the drug use. And it's not to make it seem like, it's not a choice. It's not to not hold him responsible for it, but I'm talking about how are we representing these issues? And are we talking about them? Are we giving people information that will help them to understand something more without making assumptions that are already embedded in us anyway? So that's my issue, Paul. I hope that helps. Kevin said that scene also left a bad taste in his mouth. Kevin, say why, if you would.
Yeah, I think it was for a lot of the reasons you shared. In that scene, the narrator also, the narration is the basketball court has turned into this, this place where people sell drugs and stuff, and they narrate that as they're kind of zooming in on the father. So I found it to be like kind of among the worst of kind of the exploitative things that you're talking about. Yeah, that I don't want to. I know we're kind of late on time.
No problem. Thank you. So I just want to leave something with you to think about. I believe, well, at least you know where I work. So if you have questions or additional comments, if you want to curse me out for something that I said, please feel free to email me. I will engage you with whatever questions or comments you have, because it's important to me that that we become, as a culture, more able to break down what we see, but more importantly, to realize how mass media completely impacts and influences what we believe about ourselves and other people. And I think there are ways that as we think that we know, but there's so much sort of subconscious subliminal messaging that happens in our media and in our culture that's really necessary to dissect and unpack. That I welcome being able to continue these conversations if that is what you wish to do. So please don't hesitate if you want to reach out to me after this. But I just wanted to ask how you, and we'll wrap up with this, how do you see Arthur and William positioned against each other? How are they juxtaposed, especially in the inn, or at least maybe even during the last maybe 30 minutes of the film? Is there a way that they are, that we see some sort of, we certainly see kinship, but is there a way that they are contrasted against each other or even pitted against each other that you noticed? Because I did. Ethan.
It's kind of interesting because it seems like William is now not really faced with basketball anymore towards the end of the story. And now he's realizing that there's other things he can and it seems like Arthur's the opposite. Like he still has this dream he's holding on to and trying to make it in the NBA and be a basketball player.
Yeah, I feel like there's also a way that it's almost like William is the good Negro and Arthur's the bad one, even though Arthur's team goes much farther than William's does, right? Because William makes it all the way through St. Joe's. Arthur ends up going to a 2-year college. He gets kicked out of St. Joe's. Again, the juxtaposition and what is said and is not said can say a lot. And that's a part of what I'm trying to emphasize. John, I mean, is it John?
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you the last word.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought we didn't realize that Arthur and William knew each other until the end there. It was kind of great to see them get together. But the one thing I was going to say was William was in the stands watching Arthur's team as they progressed through the state, and it looked like he was saying, you know, almost thinking about, why did I leave my neighborhood? Even though I went to this fancy school, maybe I made the wrong decision, because this is, you know, this is my neighborhood, this is my school, and this is my community. And the community was so much into Arthur's game and all of that. It's almost like you could see him going, you know, maybe he did better in one way, but he's looking at Arthur and going, you know, maybe I should have stayed here.
Yeah, there's an interesting sort of tension between the two of them. Yeah, I mean, it's not between the boys themselves, but it's just the way that they're positioned within the film and their stories, how they say different things.
If I could just say one last thing.
Sure.
I thought it was amazing that, to me, a message in the film is that you can have so much talent, but there's so many other obstacles and hurdles that, you know, these young men have to go through. And even when they get to a place where all the opportunity is there, their past can kind of haunt them. You know, if you think about Curtis going to the University of Central Florida, and he was maybe even better than William, but he was uncoachable, they said. And, you know, he brought with him whatever life's experiences that wouldn't let him do that. And then if you look at Arthur, he goes to this junior college and there's 7 Black people in the school and 6 of them lived in that little house together.
Yeah.
I just thought that was astounding. And, you know, it's like, well, how are you going to come from there and then be given this opportunity, but you don't have all of the years of preparation that other people might have that make them succeed there. And you have your basketball talent, but that is, you know, you need other things. And,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, the characters were great. And William coming together academically was such a high point for me. He's like, I'm getting A and B honor roll. And then he got disinterested, and because he got hurt, I guess, you know, but he wasn't stupid. He had the intelligence to do it, even though he didn't have background. Anyway, so
yeah, no, it's
yeah.
a good point. And Arthur also had the intelligence. You know, that's the other thing. Arthur was not a dumb kid. He just did not have, I mean, I really think it comes down to support. He did not have what he needed in order to succeed. And the team, you know, because his family was behind in the payments, that was that. So, you know, who knows what could have happened if he'd stayed, but he still succeeded in spite of. So we know that he had an intelligence that would not necessarily be recognized otherwise.
And
All
Natalie,
right.
real quick with the scholarship thing, one of my struggles was neither one of them had a lot of resources, and even though one of them had two parents at home, they were still struggling. How did the Agees even end up in a situation where they had to be in a paying role, and Williams' family did not? So I also thought that on a certain level, that was kind of a setup.
What do you mean paying level? You're talking about for college?
No, the reason he got kicked out of school is because his family had to contribute some level of resources, and from
Williams didn't.
From the very beginning, and
Yeah.
Williams never did.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that, but that's a really good point.
Because one of the other things that I think could be a nuance is if you told a story, but you also had working class white kids as a part of the story. Because everybody thinks Christian Laettner, because he has a certain kind of look, came from a family that had resources, but Christian Laettner went to a private school, and part of how they paid tuition was he helped clean the facility he went to school at.
Yeah, so right, and we don't know that. That's a really interesting point. Yes, and William did have a benefactor. Thank you, Cheryl, for reminding us of that, which is a whole other thing we could talk about. But we gotta go. So it's been an amazing experience to have this conversation with you. I really appreciate all of your thoughtful, just brilliant comments. Thank you for watching the film. Thank you for participating in this event. Thank you to Maria and Angela for hosting this. And I hope you will continue to support the North Carolina Museum of Art and all that they do. And, you know, keep watching films, especially documentaries.
Thank you, everybody. Just want to say thank you to Natalie as well. We hope you enjoyed the stimulating discussion. And we hope you join us for the next NCMA Film Club. It's going to be a monthly series that will take place the third Friday of every month. So just mark your calendars, and I will give you a little preview. The next one is in the works, and it's going to be a documentary about street art and graffiti. So, and the whole concept of what constitutes as art and public art and making art accessible. So it'll be a really engaging conversation as well. So we hope you join us. Thanks
Thanks
you,
so
everybody.
much. Bye.